India was the world's economic powerhouse, producing 25% of global GDP. In the mid 17th century, the entire world's economy was dictated by just two ports. And if you control them, you control the flow of global gold. The English records reveal a shocking truth. The man who truly dominated the trade was neither the Mughal emperor nor the Sultan of Bijapur. This man was the world's original Prince of Wall Street.
Success is a vision test. While titans bled for territory, the CEO of Swarajya eyed the world's most lucrative market, the Arabian Sea. Today, we decode the 1658 Konkan Blitz, a masterclass in vertical integration and global diplomacy against European tech giants. Territory without revenue isn't an asset, it's a drain on the treasury that leads to eventual bankruptcy. To decode the brilliance behind Shivaji Maharaj's maritime pivot, please welcome our leadership catalyst, Commander Girish Konkar. Welcome, Girish.
Thank you, Maneesha. It's always a pleasure.
Girish, we often get caught up in the glory of the sword and the scaling of the forts. We see the bravery, but we rarely see the balance sheet. Historical empires didn't survive on bravery alone, did they?
Spot on, Manisha. Maharaj was a nation builder, not just a warrior, but a strategic economist. Conquest acquire market share, but trade is the engine that keeps the lights on. A kingdom is only as strong as its treasury. By securing Konkan ports, Maharaj wasn't just chasing tactical wins, he was claiming a seat in the global table. He understood that while the sword wins the battles, the import export ledger builds civilizations. He wanted Swarajya to be a self sustaining powerhouse, not just a localized startup. Without that maritime engine, the dream of a sovereign state would have eventually run out of fuel.
Girish, we often look at the Konkan as a beautiful coastline of forts, swing palms, and beaches. Why was it so important to Shivaji Maharaj?
In 1657, the Konkan was the most contested economic zone in the world. Imagine the Konkan as a 800-kilometer long, high frequency trading floor. This wasn't just about fishing, it was about global logistics. Every empire on earth, from the Mughals in the north to the Bourbons in France, had eyes on these ports.
How big was this trade?
Um, let's put this in perspective. In the 17th century, the Indian economy was a global juggernaut. Today, India's share of world GDP fluctuates around 3.25 to 3.5%. As verified by economic historians like Angus Madison, in the mid 1600s, India, under the Mughals and the Deccan Sultanates, accounted for approximately 24 to 25% of the entire planet's GDP. The Konkan Sea Trade was the high speed fiber optic cable that connected this massive wealth to the rest of the world.
I'm curious, what was this trade about?
Manisha, the figures are staggering. Economists often call the 17th century India as a bullion sink. बताओगे सोने की चिड़िया कहा जाता था. India exported high value finished goods like textiles, silks, spices, saltpeter, steel, and imported virtually nothing else but silver, gold, and yes, horses. Historians estimate that the annual customs revenue from a single port could fund the entire standing army of any medium sized European nation. For Bijapur, the Konkan ports weren't just a revenue stream, they were the primary source of the hard currency required to buy horses and pay mercenaries.
So, gold, silver, horses were being imported in huge numbers. Which were these ports?
Yeah, so in the 1650s, the port of Dabhol was what one can say is the Wall Street of the Konkan. The Sultanate charged roughly 3.5 to 5% in customs duties. A single seasonal fleet proceeding or arriving from the Red Sea or the Persian Gulf could carry cargo worth over 1 million hones. Hones is the gold currency of that time. In today's terms, capturing the trade of Dabhol was the equivalent of a startup suddenly acquiring a capital equivalent to 280 million US dollars. Maneesha, let that sink in. A single seasonal fleet wasn't just cargo, it was a $280 million cash injection in raw metal value alone. And that's just the starting point.
What? Equal to $200 million? That's huge.
Yes. Wait, let me lay it out for you. In the 1650s, the purchasing power of gold was exponentially higher. In Maharaj's time, a few hones, that is, a gold mohurs, could pay the monthly wages of an entire infantry platoon. Today, $280 million might pay a large MNC's payroll for a month. But in the 17th century, that same amount of gold could fund a standing army of 50,000 men for a year. The Arabian horse was the 17th century equivalent of a stealth fighter jet. A million horns gave you the foreign exchange to buy thousands of these military assets. And if we adjust for the relative share of the global GDP, that 280 million raw value is more than 4 to 5 billion dollars in modern economic leverage.
Wow. I mean, that's like India's GDP today. And is this from one port of Dabhol?
Yes, Manisha, one port of Dabhol. It is mind boggling. The value wasn't just in the ships that arrived, it was in the ecosystem that they created. A port like Dabhol supported thousands of weavers, salt pan workers, and logistic handlers, the caravans, the eateries. There's a complete ecosystem thriving on those ports. And that is same even true today. Now, the sultanates didn't just get the cargo. They taxed the entry, the exit, and the sale. In GDP terms, the Konkan trade was the high margin revenue that subsidized the low margin agriculture of the inland Deccan.
So, Dabhol was the most important and richest port in the world at that time.
Manisha, get ready to be shocked. While the port of Dabhol was controlled by the Bijapur Sultanate, there was another port up north in Gujarat.
In Gujarat.
In Gujarat, that was controlled by the Mughals. And this was even bigger, more prosperous, and richer beyond measure.
And that was?
The port of Surat.
How bigger was Surat?
Surat wasn't just a big port. It its economy was the Wall Street plus the London exchanges combined of the 17th century world. In the 1660s, Surat was arguably the wealthiest city in the East. It was famously known as the Bab el Makkah, that is the gateway to Mecca, because it was the departure point for the Hajj, making it religiously sensitive and economically untouchable until Shivaji Maharaj touched it. But that we'll talk about in a later episode.
And who controlled Surat?
Now, controlling Surat was a very complex three-tiered joint venture. First, there was the political board of the Mughal administration. And the city was governed by a Mughal Mutsaddi or Nizamul Mulk, that is the governor or the collector, and appointed directly by Aurangzeb. Correction, before Aurangzeb was, I would say Delhi, emperor from Delhi. Aurangzeb came later. He controlled the military garrison and collected the customs duties. Second, the real trade was controlled by Indian plutocrats or the merchants. The most famous of these was one person called Virji Vora, described by the English as the richest man in the world. Virji Vora's personal net worth was estimated at 8 million Mughal rupees.
8 million Mughal rupees. And how much is 8 million Mughal rupees in today's terms?
Okay, hold on to your seat. If we adjust for inflation and the relative share of GDP, Virji Vora's wealth is often compared with that of Mukesh Ambani and Jeff Bezos today, exceeding $110 billion.
And you tell me one man controlled that much trade?
Yes, he held a monopoly on spices, coral, bullion, and most importantly, the credit. And the third pillar were the MNC factories. Factories are sort of what do you call them as fortified warehouses. The Dutch, the British, and the French had these factories there. They were the logistical partners providing the ships to carry the Indian textiles and all the other spices, etc., to Europe and the Middle East.
And now my next question is, how much did Surat control in economic terms?
As per the historical records, Surat's annual tax and the port dues were roughly around 1 to 1.5 million Mughal rupees. Now, if you look at the gold floor price today, the annual tax revenue of Surat alone was roughly in the range of 300 to 400 million dollars in raw gold value. Just look at the economic leverage. In a world where India held 25% of the global GDP, the economic impact of Surat's trade was equivalent to the annual revenue of a mid-sized modern nation, likely in the 40 to 60 billion dollar range today.
These are staggering figures. I never knew this.
Absolutely.
Okay. Now, you mentioned Virji Vora as one of the, what can you say, the plutocrats and the second pillar.
Yes.
What did the English have to say about him?
The English East India Company, EIC, evaluation of Virji Vora is documented in the English factories in India, documented in that document called English Factories in India from 1618 to 1669. So there's a full document on this. A series which is edited by one gentleman called William Foster. Now, EIC officials didn't see him just as a merchant. They saw him as the man who controlled the very liquidity of the Surat market, the original Prince of Wall Street. A landmark 1634 letter from the Surat factory to London identifies him as the greatest bania merchant in the world and the only monopolist of all European commodities. Records right from 1630 onwards describe him as having a sole monopoly, meaning the English could not sell coral, spices, or lead without him setting the price. He was the lender of last resort. In 1640, when the EIC ran out of cash to buy Indian textiles, they almost went bankrupt at that time, they turned to Vora. By 1642, the English were so much indebted to Virji Vora that they feared his influence over the Mughal governor, one Mir Musa, who held the power to ban their trade entirely. Virji Vora was the 17th century equivalent of a venture capitalist and a central bank combined.
Oh God.
He practiced vertical integration long before the term even existed, controlling the ships, the warehouses, and the credits. Manisha, the English, they were the rising global superpowers. Literally wrote home saying they were at the mercy of one Indian merchant. This was the scale of the economy Shivaji Maharaj was stepping into. He wasn't fighting a primitive state. He was disrupting the most sophisticated financial hub on the planet.
So Kalyan and Bhivandi were just the starting point.
The baby steps. So first, what he did was he targeted the salt monopoly. You see, the Konkans had a unique geographical location. They produced almost all the salt for the Deccan. By controlling the salt pans of the Konkan, Maharaj could exert economic pressure on the inland powers. It was the 17th century equivalent of controlling the entire energy supply. Second, strategic imports, lead, sulfur for gunpowder, and Arabian horses for cavalry were only available through these ports. If you didn't have the forex, that is the gold, from sea trade, you couldn't upgrade your military technology. You can grab as much land and territory as you want, but your economic juggler lay in who controlled your trade.
This seems to be a massive economy.
It is staggering, Manisha. In the 1650s, India was the world's manufacturing hub and the factory to the world. As I mentioned, we were one fourth of the global GDP. The Konkan coast was the delivery dock for that factory. Think of it this way: the silver that the Spanish were mining in South America was crossing the Atlantic to Europe, then traveling around Africa just to end up in the pockets of the weavers and traders in the Konkan. Shivaji Maharaj realized that the Mughals and the Sultans were essentially collectors of this massive wealth. He didn't just want to fight for territory, he wanted to own the payment gateway. By capturing the Konkan, he was moving Swarajya from a subsistence economy to a global trade power. He knew that if he could divert even 5% of that marine GDP into his treasury, he could build a force that would be financially invincible against any invader. Manisha, the Konkan move was a masterstroke by Maharaj by moving from land based revenue, that is, taxing the farmer, which was meager, to trade based revenue, that is, taxing the merchants. In corporate terms, he moved from low margin, high effort to high margin, scalable economy.
You mentioned Port Dabhol and Surat as one of the ports.
Yes.
Which were the other important ports and who controlled them?
To understand this sea frontier of 1658, we must view the Konkan not as a beach destination, but as a high stakes corporate corridor. This 800-kilometer stretch was a patchwork of competing interests, where every port acted as a strategic business unit, SBU in modern terms, controlling the flow of global wealth. Let me give you the critical trade nodes that Maharaj aimed to disrupt and integrate. The first ones that came up here was Daman in the north. This was under Portuguese control. They were the gatekeepers. Daman was a fortified hub connecting the Konkan to the Gujarat markets. Number two, as you come a little bit south, is Vasai or Basain. Again, under it was the Portuguese administration headquarters. This was their court of the north, the court, and a major shipbuilding center. Then comes to Kalyan and Bhivandi. This was under the Bijapur Sultanates, and which was one which Maharaj now first targeted in 1658. This was a dry port. mainly for internal logistics hub where Deccan goods were consolidated. Then came Mumbai, Bombay at the time. Again, at that time, it was another Portuguese. It had yet to go to the English. Now, this was a very strategic asset, a cluster of 7 islands, which were later transferred to Britain as part of dowry in somewhere in 1661 to 65. As you come further south, there is Chaul, which is near Revdanda, again under Portuguese control. This was sort of a textile capital, famous for high quality silk and cotton exports to Europe. Just a little bit south of that, you come to Zanjira, the Siddis. They were like security contractors, an impregnable firewall which was protecting the Hajj routes for the sultanates. As you come south, you come to Dabhol under Bijapur control. This was a crown jewel, one of the wealthiest ports and the primary gateway for the Arabian horse trade. Further south, you come to Rajapur, again under Bijapuri and the English. The English didn't control the port, but they had a warehousing and agreements over there, an English hub. It is a deep water outpost for pepper, saltpeter used for gunpowder, and calico cloth. Further south, now we are going approaching Goa almost, is Vengurla. Under Bijapuri administration, but Dutch control. The Dutch warehouse there was a massive logistics center for spices and all sorts of goods that would go from there. Even further south, now you come to Goa. Under Portuguese control, it was the regional headquarters. And it was the ultimate seat of European power and naval intelligence at that time.
That's a huge number of ports. Okay, now while we were fighting landlocked battles for territory, what were the Europeans doing on the water?
They were running a pure maritime protection racket. The land was controlled by the sultanates, but the operating system of the sea was owned by these four European multinational corporations. As I mentioned, the Portuguese were the old guard. They operated it's called as a Cartaz system. I think it's a Portuguese word, I suppose, I hope I pronounced it rightly, Cartaz. Purely a licensing racket. If your ship didn't pay for a Portuguese license, they seized your cargo. The English were operating to the East India Company and they wanted exclusive distribution rights for textiles and spices. So they were called as factories, which actually were mini forts, I would say. They had defensive bastions, like the one which you talked about in Rajapur. But essentially, I would say the early foreign direct investment zones. The Dutch were the logistics giants, and from Vengurla, they controlled the spice supply chain with a heavily armed fleet. The fourth one, the French were the new entrants, trying to find a niche in the crowded markets of Rajapur and Chaul.
Now, if the sultanates owned the ports, then why were they at the mercy of these Europeans?
That, Maneesha, is a tragic, I would say, capability gap of the 17th century India. For 400 years, that is after the Cholas, the Yadavs, the Indian kingdoms practically ignored maritime traditions. We lost the skill set to build and sail the high seas. While Bijapur owned the crown jewel ports like Dabhol, but they had no delivery trucks. They were like a company with a brilliant product but no logistics department. And they were therefore forced to rely on the Siddis or Europeans to move their goods,
The Siddis.
effectively handling the economic sovereignty to foreign powers.
The Siddis of Janjira.
Siddis of Janjira, correct.
Okay. So the land was the Sultanate territory,
Yes,
but the revenue stream was European.
exactly. The water was the value chain, and the Europeans owned the toll booths. So when Maharaj moved into the Konkan in 1658, he wasn't just capturing land, he was performing a hostile takeover of the entire supply chain. He realized that to be a true sovereign, he couldn't just own the shop, that is the port. He had to own the entire delivery fleet, and that's where the Maratha Navy comes in.
This changes everything. It isn't just about conquest, it's about reclaiming India's economic sovereignty.
Absolutely.
So, Maharaj is building Swarajya on land, but these four giants control the water. How exactly did they threaten him?
So, yeah, so they were a triple threat to his vision. The first threat that these Europeans were giving him, it was about the economic blockade. See, if Maharaj didn't pay for a kartaz, that's the license to the Portuguese, these powers could starve his kingdom of essential imports, that is specifically horses and lead for ammunition, sulfur. A second role that these were threatening were the intelligence surveillance. Their ships were the satellites of that era. They monitored every movement on the coast and often shared intelligence with the Mughals or Bijapur to protect their own trade interests. And the third major threat were the technological superiority. As historian Dr. B.K. Apte notes in his phenomenal research papers, the European ships had far superior firepower and tonnage. Shivaji Maharaj realized that as long as these MNCs could park a galleon, that's a large ship, off his coast and threaten his ports, he wasn't truly a sovereign CEO. He was just a subcontractor on his own land.
So, if the Portuguese were the gatekeepers and the Dutch were the logistic giants, what was Maharaj?
When Maharaj captured Kalyan and Bhivandi, he became the disruptor. He was building a local operating system that would eventually bypass their tolls and create a sovereign trade route. He was essentially unbundling the Bijapur Empire. By taking control of the land surrounding these ports, he was forcing the English and the Portuguese to negotiate with him for access to the markets and not with the Sultan.
We keep hearing about the Siddhis of Janjira. Where do they fit in into this corporate structure?
See, Maneesha, these Siddhis were the, what can you call them as the contracted security firm for the Sultanates and later the Mughals. So they were of Abyssinian origin and were legendary naval warriors. They were good fighters. And they were a monopoly. They held the Janjira Island fort, which guarded the entrance to Rajapuri Creek. I would say it was like in a modern corporate terms, you can call it like a service level agreement, an SLA. That is, in exchange for protecting the Hajj pilgrim ships and the Sultanate's trade vessels from pirates and later from the Marathas, they were given large land grants called Jagirs in the Konkan. And they posed a threat to Shivaji because they were the most aggressive competitors. They didn't just trade, they raided. They would kidnap locals into slavery, kidnap their women, and burn coastal villages. For Maharaj, the Siddhis were the firewall he had to breach to reach the sea.
Okay, now let's come back to Kalyan and Bhivandi. Maharaj commissioned the docks and started building ships. But you mentioned that over 400 years, we had lost all the knowledge and skills of
Absolutely.
shipbuilding,
Absolutely true.
especially for the large warships. So then, how was it done?
Correct. So while he had taken over the dockyards in Kalyan and Bhivandi, they were basically constructing smallish dhows and fishing vessels, not large seagoing merchant ships or warships.
Girish, though Kalyan was constructing dhows and fishing boats, a fishing boat isn't a warship,
Yeah.
whatever I can understand. You can't just put a cannon. I'm sure that is for what they require the ships. Uh, so you can't just put a cannon on a raft and then call it a navy.
Yes.
You need great technical skills to build warships with cannons. There were so many aspects about stability, center of gravity, cannon recoil that would affect the stability. I mean, where did these technical skills come from, especially when we have not been building ships for 400 years?
So, Manisha, no wonder we call Shivaji Maharaj as the nation builder. This is not a common man's or a average person's domain. First, what Maharaj did was he hired a gentleman called Fernão Vigas and his son from the Portuguese shipyards of Basain. And they brought in a team of nearly 300, they call it shipwrights and sailors.
300.
300. Now, for 10 years, they served as technical consultants and engineers at Kalyan and Bhiwandi. That was great. However, Maharaj was a brilliant strategist and shrewd. He ensured that the local Kolis, the Bhandaris, and the Agri community people there, they interned and trained under the Portuguese to master shipbuilding technical skills. This I would call as essentially the engineering college of that era. You see, shipbuilding is a massive engineering, what do you say, skill. You can't just sit under a tree and learn massive shipbuilding. You cannot just put two planks together and build a boat. You had to have great technical knowledge. Now, while this was going on, for 10 years, this went on beautifully well. We were learning, the Marathas were learning, these people were learning how to build a ship, how to design a ship, stability. There's so many things that go into that, right? Now, by May 19, 1668, the Portuguese governor was horrified that his citizens were building a disruptor navy and he ordered all nationals to return home or be declared as traitors. Now, overnight, these people ran off because now they were issued an outright threat by their governor to say, "You guys are not traitors." But for the Marathas, it was too late. In the sense, the Maratha engineers had already become experts. The sea trials were complete, the sailors were trained in local schools, and the Maratha fleet was ready to create havoc with the European trade rulers. A second thing that we can say here is merit over caste. Maharaj broke a 400-year-old social tradition by appointing commanders from the coastal working classes, the Hindus. They were men with sea in their blood. You had people like Nayak Bhandari, a leader from the Bhandari community who became a foundational chief naval officer. There was another gentleman called Lai Patil, a legendary Koli commander. And later, following a successful mission at Janjira, Maharaj offered him a palki. A palki is a huge honor in those days. But Lai Patil famously declined, asking instead for rights to sea. Maharaj honored this courage with the title Sar Patil. Third thing that he did was a diversity hire. He understood very clearly that the skill was still not with the local communities. He appointed Darya Sarang and Daulat Khan, that they were Muslims. He hired them as his admirals. And by hiring these seasoned Muslim naval officers, Maharaj gained the insider intelligence and tactics necessary to combat the Siddis and the Mughals. Now the enemy was panicking. The most powerful proof of Maharaj's success isn't in the Maratha records, but in the panic letters of his enemies. On 16th of August 1659, remember, in 58 he captured Kalyan. In 1659, the Portuguese governor wrote to the king, "A son of Shaji, a rebel captain, has made himself master of lands near Bassein and Chaul. He is powerful and obliges us to have great care, as he has made some ships of war at Bhiwandi, Kalyan, and Panvel. We have ordered our captains not to allow them to put out to sea and to impede their exit." Folks, this is classic business intelligence report. The Portuguese realized that the back door that they had owned for a century was being forced open within a year of his coming in by a new startup. Shivaji Maharaj wasn't just building ships, he was building an indigenous maritime ecosystem that challenged the most sophisticated global incumbents of the 17th century.
This is absolutely mind blowing. And if you viewers are also finding it mind blowing, please do like, share, and subscribe. And do post your comments on the in the comment section below. Right. Now, Girish, we've looked at the maps and the money, but there's a deeper, almost psychological mystery here. India that had the Cholas and the Chalukyas.
Yes.
They had they were great naval empires.
Yes.
Why by the 1600s was there such a massive capability gap in trained Hindu maritime power?
That is a profound question, Maneesha. It wasn't that we lacked the intelligence or the wood or the timber to build ships. We were hit by a cultural injunction. Between the 1200 and the mid 1600s, 400 years, the Hindu community was literally paralyzed by what many call as the cultural fatwa, the Kalapani or the Blackwater Taboo.
The Kalapani taboo. I've heard of it, but how did it impact national security?
So the orthodox interpretations of the Hindu texts, Shastric text at that time, claimed that crossing the high seas led to a loss of varna and purity. So if a Hindu sailed, he was often socially excommunicated. And this created a strategic vacuum. Now, if your best minds and the strongest leaders are forbidden from stepping onto a ship, you effectively handing over the keys of your ocean to foreign powers.
And this led to a very strange family strategy along the coast, didn't it?
Exactly. You see, to survive, the families in Konkan and the Malabar regions developed a workaround. So to keep their trade wealth within the family, often one son would convert to Islam.
Oh,
As a Muslim, he could sail to Aden or Malacca without any of these religious penalty, while his Hindu brothers managed the logistics on land. This wasn't just about fate, it was a commercial pivot to bypass a rigid social constraint.
so the seagoing talent was essentially being outsourced or converted out of the community. How did Shivaji Maharaj view this?
So he views it as a critical systems failure. Maharaj realized that as long as the Kalapani taboo existed, he would always be a tenant in his own kingdom, relying on foreign contractors for security. And he did something any CEO would call what is cultural re engineering. He didn't just build ships, he ensured he deleted the taboo. He fought, ignored the Orthodox protests, and there were many protests, and actively recruited local communities, the Kolis, the Bhandaris, and the Agris, into a state run force. He made sure that you could be a devout Hindu and a sea lord, a Darya Sarang, at the same time.
So he wasn't just building hardware, that's the ships. He was rewriting the software of the community.
Precisely. He institutionalized the seagoing Hindu. By providing state protection and royal patronage, he broke this 400-year-old cultural lockdown. He realized that if the brains of the nation are afraid of the water, the nation has no future on the global stage.
It's a powerful lesson in leadership. Sometimes the biggest obstacle to expansion isn't the enemy outside, but
Absolutely
the
correct.
mental firewall inside.
Very well said, Maneesha. Maharaj didn't just reclaim the Konkan, he reclaimed the Indian maritime identity. And that, folks, is how you build a navy from startup. Manisha, India had forgotten how to literally sail and to construct the ships. Maharaj restarted that tradition.
What type of ships did Maratha fleet build?
Yes, the foreign powers had large ships with 40 cannon broadsides. Now, this was very technical and I would say currently beyond the scope of the Maratha shipbuilders. So Maharaj, he adapted his Ganimi Kawa tactics, the guerrilla warfare tactics, onto the water. He focused on creek warfare. He built smaller, shallower vessels like the Galbat and the Sangameshwari. He designed ships for the creeks and the shallow waters. The Galbat was a fast, agile, and was able to hide in the winding creeks of the Konkan. The Sangameshwari, named after the local craftsman's technique. These were, I would call it, essentially the speedboats of those eras. And the third was the Ghurab. These Ghurabs were his heavy artillery ships. This was a low profile tank on water because it sat lower in the water than the British ships. Many European cannonballs would simply fly right over because in the broadsides you could not lower the gun below a particular angle, and therefore when the shots are fired they would fly over the Ghurab. Whereas the Ghurab's heavy forward guns could rip through the enemy's wooden hull at the waterline. As Dr. B.K. Apte notes, these ships were designed to lure the heavy European ships into shallow, rocky creeks of the Konkan. And once the big ships got stuck or couldn't maneuver, Maharaj's speedboats would swarm them. I just imagine, Manisha, he didn't learn the naval warfare from a book. He translated his land based ambush tactics into a maritime strategy.
So he also developed a maritime strategy to suit the times.
Absolutely. He didn't just build ships, he also built the sea forts. Forts, massive, lovely, beautiful forts like Sindhudurg, Vijayadurg, to act as floating bases. And we will talk about all these forts much later in the later future episodes. Now, this solved the supply chain problem. See, a ship is useless if it has no safe harbor to refit. He started with only 20 ships at Kalyan in 1658. He failed, he learned, and he scaled. By 1680, the Maratha Navy had over 400 vessels.
It sounds like he wasn't just building a navy, he was designing an operating system for the Indian Ocean.
Precisely. Absolutely correct. Maharaj proved a leader doesn't need to be a field expert if they are a master of pattern recognition. He mapped the pattern of the mountain ambush into the waves, realizing that if you control the gate, that is the port, you control the room, that is the trade. I would say the lesson for today's CEO is simple. Don't wait for perfect technology. Leverage the indigenous skills already in your team. Hire consultants to bridge technical gaps and adapt your core competency. In Maharaj's case, guerrilla warfare to the new platform, the sea. Maneesha, the Maratha Navy was just getting started. By his 1674 coronation, it was a formidable force that powers like the English were forced to respect. As we'll explore in our later episodes, the Navy evolved into a separate, specialized fighting arm, far more than just any other department of the
Uh,
army.
Girish, now we've seen the blueprints and the sheer economic genius of the Konkan expansion. But there is one major adversary who still have not discussed much, a shadow that refused to move, the Siddhis of Janjira. I believe the Janjira was a fort which no one could take over.
You're right, Manisha. If the Konkan was the market, Janjira was the impenetrable fortress guarding the vault. The Siddhis were the toughest nuts to crack for the Maratha in Maratha history. Maharaj used every trick in the book, from psychological warfare to engineering miracles, to tackle this threat, which will now become the focus of our next episode. 1658 marked Maharaj's official foray into Konkan. He didn't just conquer land, he disrupted the global status quo. By threatening monopolies that stood for centuries, the power scale in India had shifted significantly. But to truly secure the sovereignty, he first had to face the Siddhis. Folks, I hope today's deep dive gave you a new lens on why Shivaji Maharaj is the ultimate nation builder. He didn't just fight battles, he built an industrial and financial ecosystem. He moved from a land mindset to a global vision. And this is just the start. Join us in episode 11, where we face the Lords of the Sea, the Siddhis of Janjira.
If you found value in this commander's perspective, do like, share, and subscribe. Leave your comments below, and feedback is the fuel that inspires us to bring this authentic, research backed content to you. Until next time, thank you, Girish.
Thank you and Jai Hind.
Jai Hind.